The question that is our talk title today is, who are we? Who are we? And at first glance, um, we begin to, maybe through our training in this philosophy, we begin to talk about how we're made in the image and likeness of spirit, and how who I am is the perfect emanation of spirit. And yet it's a little more complex, because truly we are God in the flesh. We are the unique, unrepeatable way that spirit shows up in human form. And week after week, I remind us of that, because at certain points and times in our lives, we are so identified with the human aspect of who we are that we forget the truth of who we are. And we need to know the truth of who we are in order to be able to move forward beyond the world of appearances. And yet we've been talking lots about inclusion. We've been talking about Black Lives Matter. We've been talking about police. We've been talking about coronavirus. Even our very own Dolores has brought up, what's happening in our world today? Why is this happening? And are we actually living in a world, in a society where we are against one another? And in this time where sometimes we might think that others are sitting back laughing at us, it may in fact be here that even within our own Downey Center for Spiritual Living, that folks may not feel comfortable enough to really be quote unquote out. Now, when I use that word out, I'm reminded of back in the days of Stonewall and Gay Pride Month, where we would talk about, are you out? Does your family know? And, and people were kind of talking like this, and covering their mouth and using code words, because it was not okay to fully express yourself if you were lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And now what's interesting is that in our world, in our society, and even in religious groups, there are many people who are not out with their identities. And I am not talking about sexual orientation. I'm talking about political affiliations. I'm talking about the ways in which they identify themselves because of fear of retaliation of some sort, or because of fear that they will not be accepted and honored in religious communities. Now, it's interesting that we look at this time today, and we're talking a lot about racism and race relations and bias, and we throw around the word inclusion. And yet there are many of us maybe sitting here today that are not comfortable enough really, truly being okay with who they are, And when we came up with our vision and mission statement, one of the things that was said about our vision and mission statement is that it came out of visioning. Visioning is that those moments where we relax, where we center ourselves, when each individual is knowing their perfection, their wholeness, and we simply ask the questions, what is God's divine vision of Downey Center for Spiritual Living? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And each and every month that we participated in the visioning that Reverend Kevin facilitated for us, we were able to then glean and harvest this vision and mission statement that by valuing and empowering all, we inspire a joyous and fulfilling life. And not all places are valuing and empowering all. Even if just for a moment you were to think about your age, and you don't have to shout out your age, but just think about your age. That's a way that people identify themselves. Think about your race. Think for a moment about your ethnicity, the region in which your family or you are from. Think for a moment about your career and your education, your religion, or even your religion before this philosophy entered your life. Think about your gender, whether you were born male or female, or even how you express today, whether you express as a man or a woman. And your sexual orientation. Think about your political affiliations. In today's day and age, many of us suppress and repress parts of who we are. There's something about that list where individuals suppress or repress or hide who they are. Now, why might that be? You know, I hear lots of folks saying, yeah, you know, I don't talk about that part of my life. I don't share that part of who I am, or I keep that, you know, at home. It stays at the door. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that I have to leave part of who I am at the door so as not to feel excluded from a group? Well, beloveds, each and every Sunday morning at various Zoom rooms and in physical locations, when we were meeting in physical locations, once people entered their religious communities, there were parts of themselves that they repressed and that are still being repressed today. And I wonder, how that came to be, how we've been raised to favor one and not favor another. You know, sometimes, at least back in the day and even today, people repress part of who they are because they face serious threats due to the biases of others. I haven't even talked about our mental health status and how our ability, whether we're able-bodied or differently abled, and how folks try to hide or repress certain parts of who they are because of fear. I remember once upon a time, it was not fashionable to be a recovering drug addict. And then something happened and everybody was in recovery. They wanted to make up things to be in recovery about because it was fashionable. It was a fashion statement. But how is it then that our vision and mission statement really takes effect when folks, even in our own communities, are afraid to really own who they are. I tend to believe that how can I own that I am the life of God itself in human form if I can't own all of the ways that I identify? When I think about a beautiful flower, and I think of us as all these a variety of flowers, not all roses are the same. They don't all have the same petals, the same colors, the same stem, the same leaves, the same shape. And yet, can I accept myself with all of my identities? Now, as you thought of all of your identities, your race, your ethnicity, your age, your sexual orientation, your mental health status, your ability, your religion, your education, your financial status. You know, if you were to put a circle around the ones you thought society valued, which ones would you circle? Which ones would you underline where you would say society does not value this about who I am? What I love about this community is that we have variety and difference in so many ways. And what we say is by valuing and empowering all. All means all. And that's all means. I love it on Sundays when our 92-year-olds are saying, hey, I'm 92, and yet our 95-year-old speaks up, well, I got you all beat, I'm 95, and that we value that we have that laugh. But what is it that we're not talking about? How is it that we're letting race and the propaganda from the news, how are we letting that affect how we see one another and how we include one another? How is it that I'm allowing my hidden biases to dictate who I consider friend, who I consider my community member, or my sister, or my brother, or my sibling? You see, it's important for us to actually be able to have and experience the blessing that we are to the world. And for us to be able to individually recognize, oh, wow, I've been looking down my nose at those people. They're not as educated as I am. They're not as refined as I am. They're not as cool as I am. They're not as as I am. And it's important to recognize that, because it is in that we begin to actually form barriers of separation instead of dissolving and dismantling the table of separation. You know, there was a poem, you know, as much as we try to separate ourselves from other, oh, well, I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not that. There was a poem a long time ago, and I don't remember it, but maybe one of you will, that said, you know, when they came for the Jews, I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't do anything. And they took them away. And when they came for the so-and-sos, I wasn't that, so I didn't do anything. So they took them away. And then as it gets narrow and narrow, as they came for so-and-so, I wasn't that. So, hey, it didn't affect me, it didn't impact me. So I didn't do anything about it, and they took them away. And then at the end, it's kind of like, and then they came for me, and there was nobody to protect me. There was nobody there that would say, hey, wait a minute, that's not okay. You know, I'm reminded of the words of Jesus the Christ when he said, if you have done these unto the least of me, you have done it unto me. And so in my, oh, thank you, Reverend Kevin. It was Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists and I did not speak up, right? And so when we don't value and appreciate, when we're not practicing inclusion, when we're looking down at someone else because they're not XYZ, they're not good enough, they're not white enough, they're not black enough, they're not heterosexual enough, they're too gay, they're too flamboyant, they're too, they're too outspoken, they're too right wing or left wing or right in the middle or in between, they're too educated, they're not educated enough, they're too uppity because they got money, or they're not uppity enough, they're too poor. Whatever it is that is still living in us, believe me, it is still living in us. This is our call today, to begin to break down and dissolve the barriers of an us and them. How else do we create a world that works for everyone? How else is it that I'm able to see God as you when I'm thinking that you and your people are putting out diseases in the world? How is it that I see you as God when I think that you and your people are out to get me? And though it is a very human experience, and though it is very, very real, I tend to believe that we can still address inadequacies, that we can still address the inequity, that we can still begin to address the oppression that happens in our world and our society, and do it from a place of, I know who I am. Here's who I am. Here's how I am expressing myself. And oh, by the way, I am the unique and unrepeatable way that God, that life shows up in human form. And oh, by the way, I see you, I hear you, and I accept you in all the ways you identify yourself. And you too are the unique and unrepeatable way that God, that life shows up in human form. There is a quote by Corella. I know that Reverend Kevin has that for us. She's rated like one of the top human resources people. And her quote, let's see. Oh, thank you. Creating a culture of inclusion starts with creating a culture of awareness. I liken a self-awareness strategy to having a full-length mirror. Keep checking yourself in the mirror, because the success of inclusion depends on the authenticity of your leadership. Now, let's leave that there for a moment. For those of you who may not believe or think that you are a leader right where you are. Irrespective of your age does not determine whether you're a leader or not. If you get on the phone and you're talking to your daughter, your mother, your cousin, your sister, your niece, your nephew, you are a leader, because what you speak influences and impacts each and every person. So when we're looking at creating a culture, a way of being, that's what culture means, a way of being, a common experience that we all have, especially like here at Downey CSL. We're creating a culture of inclusion. And the only way that we can do that is to be self-aware. So I, as your spiritual director, I get to keep looking at areas in my life where I still am not being as inclusive as I possibly could. I get to look at the words that I speak, how outdated they are, and whether they still fit, and whether my words and my actions still demonstrate that I value who you are, each and every one of you. So sometimes it's important when we are together and someone says something that actually is kind of like an ouch to a way that I identify, or the way that you identify, in a most loving and compassionate way. We get to go, wow, ooh, ouch, that hurts. Or, can we be a little more inclusive? We get to have those kinds of courageous conversations. Sometimes in the most subtle ways, I say things, we say things as if that's the way it is, because that's how we've been living. And yet, for many people don't have the experience that we have. I mean, many folks cannot even participate in religious ceremonies because they don't have computers in the United States of America, or internet that works. I had the great opportunity this week to participate in La Conferencia de las Américas, which is the Science of Mind conference that was supposed to be in Chapala. And because of our health crisis worldwide, we met via Zoom. And how amazing it is to be with people all over the world, to hear different perspectives. Am I putting myself in situations to hear other people's perspective? If I'm a person who listens to the news, which I'm not, I'm going to invite you to hear news from other countries, from like the BBC, or from other news outlets that are worldwide outlets outside of the US, to see what they're concerned about, to see their spin, to hear the variety and the difference, because we've been so acculturated and so accustomed and so trained to believe in one particular way, that sometimes we get so closed-minded that we cannot open up and allow others to have a different opinion. That's why I continue to say that, yeah, having a like-minded community is great, but having a love-minded community is awesome. Because we don't all think alike. We don't all want to choose the same thing. But I get to become aware a little bit more and more today. But I also get to start right here in recognizing the areas of my own human identity where I'm not comfortable, where I don't feel free enough. And so I invite you this week, beloveds, to really, really look and see, can I embrace the all of me? Can I embrace the allness of who I am and how I express what my identities are? Because as I begin to accept myself, it makes it a little bit easier to accept others. I may not agree, but there's room at the table. There's room at the table. There's space in our hearts for all. And believe me, if you think that there's no space in your heart for all, there is. Because your heart is the heart of the one power, the one presence, the one life. You are created in the image and likeness of this magnificent power, this magnificent presence that said, I'm not just going to create one thing to be the same. I am going to create all of this, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be an array. And so my work is to see the godness in all of us. But first, I have to be okay with the way God expresses as me. Remember the words of Karen Drucker, right? And who I am and all I do is a blessing to the world. And who you are and all you do is a blessing to the world. And who we are and all we do is a blessing to the world. Show your fullness. Be who you are, and know that you are loved and cared for with me and with this community. It is so, and so it is.